Alright guys, we've got some more interesting Nintendo Switch RPG news and more to go over. We're going to start off with Stellar Blade, a game that I'm pretty sure you guys are not tired of hearing about, right? But we're not talking about all the nonsense with this game. We're talking about the actual good stuff with it. Stellar Blade, with the sales so far. Now, Sony and ShiftUp have not talked about anything when it comes to the performance of the game sales-wise, but we do have a little bit of anecdotal evidence that this game is putting in some solid numbers for a brand new IP. So right now, Stellar Blade is still #1 physical on Amazon here in the US. And remember, games are still being bought physical. We've seen the leaks from Sony. A lot of games are still being bought physical. So don't believe all the stuff that's out there that's trying to sit there and say that nobody buys physical games anymore. No, people still buy physical games. And I put this out there on Twitter. A lot of you guys had different reactions. I talked about how Stellar Blade is #1 still at this point physical on Amazon in these sales, and I think it's a combination of people being excited for the game. I know I was very excited to play a brand new character action RPG game from a Sony and this upstart studio ShiftUp, but I think that the non-patched version as well, if you want the game without some of these slight alterations to the outfits, even though you lose out on the new game plus and you lose out on so many other things, if you want that, the physical option is the way to go. Because when they were putting the game in to be printed on the disc, they were still working on other things. They did not have the new game plus and all that ready as the game needed to be sent off to go put on a physical disc, but they still work on things even afterwards, which pretty much most games do that at this point. So you usually get day one patches for a lot of games, Nintendo's titles included. Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, there was a post-launch patch with that. There's been multiple other games that Nintendo's done that before, so it's not uncommon for that to happen in terms of the final revisions and things that they're going to be doing, but it's really good to see that Stellar Blade is still #1 on here. I love to see that single player is still alive and well, and people are excited about that, and physical is still alive and well despite all the noise when it comes down to it. So Stellar Blade being a brand new IP character action game with some jank to it based off the demo that people played, but even after the updates where they did improve the input delay and the timing, there's still some jank with the platforming and other things. But I think about 20 hours or so plus into it. I plan on 100%ing the game or getting pretty close to that and trying out New Game Plus, then having a review for you. And trust me, you're going to want to hear what I have to say about this game, because this game is absolutely wild. And I think that there is, I would say, a bit of an underrating to this game and stuff that people aren't talking about when it comes to the gameplay and what it does as a brand new IP. So we're going to talk about that. But getting into a little bit more Stellar Blade news, the user reviews. Now, this is something that I usually just disregard, because on this channel, we'll cover the reviews, the critical reviews. Now, I did one for Stellar Blade. If you missed it, check it out, link in the description. We go over the reviews, the high scores, the mid scores, the low scores, and get an idea of exactly what this game is about according to some of the people that reviewed the game professionally. But there is the other side. There's the user reviews, and I throw them away because there's been so many instances of review bombing. You can't verify if people have played the game. There are a multitude of reasons why I don't really pay too much attention to user reviews. At least with the critical review, you can go there, you can see what they have to say, you can call it BS or not based off of that. But with user reviews, there's no way that you can even go and see it. They just put some little paragraph and that's that. However, Stellar Blade has the highest ever user score for any PlayStation 5 game, and I don't think that is a mistake. I don't think people are just going there and showering it with praise for any type of reason, because you know how the internet can be with games. It has a 9.2, and I think the reason why it has so many high scores is because this is a throwback to what we all loved back in the day. We don't have to worry about always online. We don't have to worry about any type of nonsense when it comes down to the gameplay. It's all about the gameplay. It's not a movie cutscene type of game. It's a game that has sauce overall. It has that pizzazz and flair, and it's not a movie soundtrack. The music is upbeat. It's got the vibes. It's got just this majestic tone to it, this cool synthetic slash, pop star, but at the same time, kind of like action paced and then vibe. Like, it's super cool what they've been able to do. When you combine all of that with the look of Eve, the style that she has, the gameplay, the combat, it's got some of of the stuff like a Souls game, but it's not completely slow. Like when it comes to some of the things with Souls games, it doesn't have every single element. It's got elements from even like Resident Evil in there when it comes to the shooting mechanics in the game. It's got elements from like Horizon. It's got just a lot of different things, and people really do love a character-driven single-player game that feels like a throwback to the old school games of yesteryear and like the stuff that we get on Switch all the time. But Xbox and PlayStation, we do get those, but not necessarily first party wise. There's always some type of huge hook or some type of, oh, it's in space, Starfield, or oh, it's this big movie type of thing and a lot of cutscenes or graphics or whatever the case is, like with Horizon or with God of War. But this game doesn't really have that too much. It's more about the game, and the story isn't super crazy good or anything, but it gets the job done for what it needs to be. So I think that's the reason why fans are just over the moon when it comes to these user reviews and going crazy on here. But like I said, you know, it is user reviews. You don't even know if people played the game that much. They might just be there just putting whatever they want. But I don't think that there's a mistake with this one here. I think that this game is getting these type of reviews because it's such a breath of fresh air compared to the typical Sony first party type of games in terms of what they try to do. I think the last one where people were really like, man, this is kind of crazy, was like Returnal. That game is super gameplay focused, but there's a lot of nonsense and the soundtrack isn't anywhere near as good. But this is the first time where it actually feels like, yo, the soundtrack has the vibes, the gameplay, the sauce, everything's kind of all came together. So I will talk about it more once I've completely finished the game. But we're going to get to another thing here that's been a bit controversial for Nintendo, and that is the Paper Mario 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second. Now, there was a very interesting post over on Twitter. Christopher Dring, who he is the head of GameIndustry.biz. He also looks at the sales in the UK, has access to those numbers. So he's definitely in the industry here from the media perspective. And he polled people on whether they care about this 60 frames per second versus 30 frames per second controversy with Paper Mario, the Thousand Year Door on the Nintendo Switch, the remake. Now, for those who don't know, or just to get caught up real briefly, Paper Mario, the Thousand Year Door ran at 60 frames per second on the GameCube, but it runs only at 30 frames per second on the Nintendo Switch. Although there is a huge graphics boost from the GameCube version to the Nintendo Switch version. Yesterday, I tweeted that some devs are having to be selective over what to invest time/money on based on how many gamers actually care about these features. Here's how Nintendo fans, actual fans, not casuals, feel about Paper Mario Remake behind 30 frames per second via Nintendo Life. Are you bothered by Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door's 30 frames per second frame rate on Switch? There was over 2,200 votes. Now, with 32% of the vote, they said not at all, 30 is fine. At 9% of the vote, they said, I can tolerate 30 frames per second for a slower paced RPG. At 25% of the vote, they said, I'd rather have 60 frames per second, but 30 frames per second is okay. At 15%, it says, I'm a bit miffed at the downgrade, to be honest. At only 5%, it says 30 frames per second is a deal breaker. And then at 14%, it says, who cares? We're getting Paper Mario, the Thousand Year Door remake. So if you total up those numbers, it's only about 20% of people that really have a big issue with it, to where it could be a deal breaker, or it could be to where they don't really get the game at all. About 20%. 80% say, hey, look, I'd rather have it, but it's fine with that 25%, or who cares, I'm gonna get the game, or 30 frames per second is fine, or hey, I can deal with it, it's a slower paced RPG. So very interesting, but at the same time, these results aren't shocking because we've seen this throughout the whole Nintendo Switch generation with the 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second. People, for the most part, will buy games based off of the gameplay. They'll buy it based off of that. They're not worried about whether it's 30 or 60. Now, 60 would be better, don't get me wrong. I played Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door on the GameCube, and the 60 is great. But I've also played games at 30 frames per second, and just as long, what they have to make sure to do here, that's why I said, hey, look, I need to play the game first before I say, oh my God, I'm really angry or not. I need to play it, see how it feels. As long as the button inputs and the input latency and the delay is not bad, as long as it's responsive and smooth, then okay, I can be okay with that for a slower based turn RPG. But if it's an action RPG, if it's a game, fast twitch movements and dodging and all of that, I think that 60 frames per second is absolutely more needed for those type of games. So sports games, racing games, fighting games, stuff like Super Smash Brothers should always be at 60 frames per second. Mario Kart, 60 frames per second. Sports games, fighting games, ARMS, 60 frames per second. Pokken Tournament, 60 frames. But games that are a bit slower paced, I mean, I would still love 60, and I think 60 should be what you shoot for. But if they can't do it, or if it's going to be uneven, or if it's going to have issues, or whatever the case is, then locking it down at 30 and really working hard on the input delay and latency. That is the big thing when it comes down to it. And I think that's what I'm going to be looking at with Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door. That's fine. You guys want to really rehaul the graphics and make it look like the thick paper aesthetic, which the game is looking incredible based off of comparisons here. That's okay, but it better come with good controls, and it better come with non-laggy and input delay. The load times better be quick. There needs to be a number of things to be better if you're going to go with that 30 frames. Now, from what I saw with certain other games that weren't 60, but I would have liked them to be, like a Kirby in the Forgotten Land, that is not 60 frames per second, it's at 30, but the inputs and the timing of the button presses, all of those were really good. It felt great to play. So as long as they lock it down and that is fine, then I'll be okay with the two. If I was to vote, I'd rather have 60 frames per second, but 30 frames is okay. So that would be my answer if I had to do this, because I'm going to play the game. I want to play Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door. I want to prove to Nintendo that this is the direction that they need to go in when it comes down to it, but I'm really hoping that that 30 versus 60 doesn't affect the gameplay when it comes down to the timing of your button presses and what you do. But yes, it is a turn-based RPG. So what do you guys think about Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door and what's going on here with the 30 frames per second versus 60 frames per second? Let me know in the comment section. But I also want to get into the next topic here, guys. We're going to be talking about Unicorn Overlord and how it did overall. Now, we know back in April, they did talk about how the game has sold over 500,000 units, all platforms combined. But now we have a little bit more of an idea of exactly the breakdown when it comes to Unicorn Overlord and how well it sold. Now, they don't have any individual sales numbers, but on the NPD sales list, what they do is they show the overall game's top 20, and it doesn't include Nintendo Switch digital sales. So no digital sales are included for Nintendo Switch first-party titles at all. But Princess Peach Showtime, it came in at number 6. So that's definitely not bad. Shout outs to Princess Peach Showtime. And once again, without digital sales. But Unicorn Overlord is the interesting game here because it came in at number 8 overall on the board. However, it came in at number 2 on the Nintendo Switch only best sellers for March 2024. That's the time frame that this is taking place, March 2024 best sellers. So it came in at number 2. Now the interesting thing is like, okay, well, we know that it did over 500,000 plus. I wonder how good it did on Xbox and PlayStation. Well, if you look at their charts, Unicorn Overlord is not even in the top 10 on Xbox or PlayStation systems. So right there, Unicorn Overlord did the majority of its damage on the Nintendo Switch when it comes to consoles. So there was a little article that we discussed a while back with Unicorn Overlord talking about how the developers were only going to have this game on the PlayStation Vita and the PlayStation 4 when they were first planning it. But because of the market changes that went on over the course of development, they decided to shift it over to all the platforms. And that was a good idea, because if this was only a PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and Vita, because there's no PC version of this game at all. They probably couldn't even do PS Vita at this point. That would probably be a disastrous launch for this, because PlayStation has so many games that people are playing with Helldivers and Final Fantasy and Yakuza and Grand Blue and all these different games that are kind of packed in there. The Nintendo Switch has been able to kind of shine above it a little bit, because this year's been light when it comes to big Nintendo Switch first-party titles. Games like Unicorn Overlord have scored much better than the majority of Nintendo's first-party games that are coming out. So I can see that's why Unicorn Overlord did so well starting out on the Nintendo Switch. So congrats to Atlas and Vanillaware on that when they made the right choice with bringing that over. But speaking of making the right choice, right now Monolith Soft is hiring more programmers. They're looking to make the right choice for their next big games upcoming here on the Nintendo Switch 2. So shout outs to My Nintendo News for the write-up here. They stated that the talented team over at Monolith Soft are currently in the process of recruiting more programmers to help develop the next project, which does remain at this point publicly unknown. We do know that Monolith Soft has something cooking up. Now, recently, Monolith Soft published an interview on their website in an effort to help drive recruitment at the RPG studio. Monolith Soft's last title was Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and its DLC, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed, which I have a big video on that I did recently. Make sure you check that video out, just showing some love and the anniversary for how awesome that DLC is. The company also helps out with a variety of Nintendo IPs like Splatoon and The Legend of Zelda and Animal Crossing. So this hiring could be for various different things, right? They have multiple different studios spread across Japan, but I'm thinking that this is definitely for Takahashi Team 1. I think that they need to get something going. They're probably buckling down and getting ready to show that first next generation RPG that Nintendo loves to have to showcase whatever system they're doing. This is something that Monolith Soft has been doing for quite some time. So they're gearing up, getting ready, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do next as they add on more to their team and get that next big project ready to show off for the fans out there. So that's going to wrap it up for this one here, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out more of my Nintendo Switch and RPG news right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.